I'm Kathryn Goldman Schuyler, and this is Exploring Leadership. We are here today with Rob Chesnut, who is the author of a new book, Intentional Integrity: How Smart Companies Can Lead an Ethical Revolution. He is Chief Ethics Officer of Airbnb, and before that was General Counsel of Airbnb, and before that worked for many years with eBay. He's a graduate of Harvard Law and the University of Virginia. Rob, what is an ethical revolution? We don't often hear of executive officers of corporations wanting to lead a revolution. What's an ethical revolution that you want to lead?
Well, it's the idea that for decades, companies have really been focused just on one thing, and that is make money. And that's how success has been defined. And what we've found actually just in the last several years is that the world is expecting more of leaders and expecting more of companies. I think behavior that used to be swept under the rug is now being splashed all over the news. A number of brands and leaders have had a number of issues, Uber, WeWork, Google, and the like, really spread out for all the world to see. And it's been really quite damaging to the brands. So like it or not, I think companies are facing a new world where people expect better behavior from leaders and they want better behavior from companies.
The core of this process, as you describe it, is integrity. What's integrity? What's integrity to you personally? And what's integrity for a company?
I think integrity starts with defining some sense of what good is or what right is. Different people can argue about what exactly is good or has integrity in any particular situation. But I think it's important, both I think as an individual and as a company, to set out a standard, set out what you believe is right, what your values are, as an initial matter. And then integrity means following those values, living those values, even when it appears to be in your self-interest, at least in the short term, to do so.
So how did you come to this? How did integrity come to be so important to you in your life and in your work?
I'd like to think integrity has always been important to me. I tell a story in the book where my mother, I never forgot, my mother was leaving a store with me one day when I was young. And we got almost to the car and my mom stopped and said, "We got to go back in the store." And I said, "Why?" And my mom said, "The clerk got the change wrong." So I think I just naturally assumed that we hadn't gotten enough change. And what had happened was that the cashier had actually given my mom too much money. And I'll never forget the look of surprise on the cashier's face when my mother came back to give money back to the cashier. And I'll never forget, my mom said, when I asked my mom, like, "Why did we do that?" My mom said, "Money didn't belong to us." And, I think throughout my career, I think that sort of lesson stuck with me. I was a federal prosecutor for a number of years. When I was at eBay, I started and ran their trust and safety group, which is responsible for defining what you could buy and sell on eBay and then enforcing those rules. And as a lawyer, I think there's a certain element of knowing what the law is and ensuring that a company that you work for is complying with the law. So it's always been an element for me, I think, of my life. It became particularly important, though, about 4 years ago. I recall several things happening. One, Me Too. There was the movement of Me Too. It really struck me, and it began to hit home for me in a real way what so many women were experiencing in the workplace and how wrong that was. And it particularly hit home because of the problems that Uber was having. Susan Fowler, an Uber employee, famously wrote a blog post that set out all of the problems at the company, and it shook that brand to the core. And it was followed by other allegations of bad behavior by leaders at other companies. And I'll never forget, I was reading the stories. I was the general counsel of Airbnb at the time. And I thought, wow, this sort of thing could happen anywhere. It could happen at Airbnb. What can be done to drive integrity into the culture of a company? Because I'd rather learn from other people's mistakes. And so what could we do as a company to drive integrity into the culture so that this sort of thing doesn't happen to us?
So did what you do change the culture much, and how did it change?
Yeah, you know what? I talked to Brian Chesky, Airbnb's founder and CEO, and he looked at me a few months ago and he said, Rob, you've actually made ethics cool. And he said, I didn't think that was possible. But ethics, I think before we embarked on this journey of integrity, I think people, the leaders in the company, I think, are good people and have integrity and behave well. But it was the sort of thing that wasn't talked about. You hire people, you like to believe they've got integrity. You generally try to act the right way, but it wasn't part of the conversation. I think what we've been able to do is make integrity something that you talk about, something that's actually discussed openly. And part of the learnings that I've gone through in this process is actually defining integrity and having an open conversation about it makes all the difference in the world. Silence and ambiguity are actually the enemies of integrity. Those sorts of environments are where people feel comfortable making their own integrity decisions. We all think we've got integrity. We all cut ourselves some slack when it comes to our own actions. And in an environment where you don't talk about integrity and everybody judges for themselves what has integrity, that's where you end up getting into ethical problems.
That's so interesting, because one can see that, and I don't want to veer off too much, but one can see that at political levels in many countries, that people who are, at each other's throats practically think they're doing it out of integrity. They each think that they're right and that they're righteous. So how do you avoid that in a company?
In a political environment, there is a natural division. There are two or more opposing political views, and often different views about what is ethical. I think a company has an advantage in one important respect, and that is there's a unity of purpose and a unity of leadership. There is no opposition inside of a company. Typically, there is a board. The board is aligned with the CEO, and the CEO is aligned with leadership. So what you can do is, as a leader, you can set out your vision of a company's values, and you can set out what is important, and you can lead by your own example. And that in turn can have a tremendous influence on the entire company. So I think it's actually quite possible to lead with integrity in a company, even in ways where it's not necessarily as easy when you are in a political environment.
Part of what's intriguing recently, though, I think, in companies as well, and you mentioned what happened in Uber with Susan Fowler's blog post, we do see examples, and you wrote of them in your book as well, of members of workers in a company having different views than the official view. do you see, how does there space for that? How can there be space for these differing views, for discussion, for, in a sense, some form of conversation about what is ethical? Or is it all set
Right.
by the CEO and on downward?
Right. I think there's a danger in having the CEO promulgate rules like coming down from the mountain with stone tablets and saying this is the way it's going to be. We live in a world now where companies are global, they're diverse. Employees come from different backgrounds and different cultures, different religions. It's not necessarily clear, just without discussion, what's right and wrong in that kind of an environment. And I think it's important for leaders to get input from a wide variety of people, not just according to their geographical location, but according to the types of work that they do. I do lots of talks around integrity at Airbnb. You get very different perspectives when you talk to marketing versus engineering versus customer support. And when you're building a code of ethics, it's really helpful, I think, to have a group in the company that gives you input from a lot of different perspectives. So many companies create their code of ethics. They don't create a code of ethics, right? Their law firm sends it to them. And they fill in their name at the top. They send out an email and tell everybody to check a box and say that they've read it. Or maybe they copy some other company's code of ethics and use that. I think the most effective code of ethics are those that are created by a company with input from a number of people in the company, written in the company's language and using the company's basic values and purpose sort of as an anchor. I think those resonate with employees, and I think that they are more likely to be accepted because they are created with input from so many people inside of a company.
I'm really excited to hear you say that. My background is as an organization development consultant and leadership coach, and you are just speaking exactly what we would hope all across that profession for executives to be thinking. Because for decades, organization development encouraged people to form what they call diagonal slice teams to give input. In other words, people from all different parts of the company, from all different levels, so that when something was decided, it fitted people across the company. And I've also taught ethics for years. So I was at a car repair place one time, Rob, and saw a code of ethics on the wall and commented to the people there working there. It's like, oh, what great principles. And he said, what are you talking about? Oh, that. Oh, yeah, that's been there for years. And he didn't really know what was in it. And another time I was at a restaurant and saw a code of ethics on the wall. And the owner of it, it was a small restaurant, said, oh, I didn't notice that. That was left by the previous owner.
Right. Isn't that funny? I think the old world of integrity, the 20th century view, is that there's a code of ethics, but it's stuffed in an employee handbook that nobody reads. There might be a beautiful integrity poster on the wall that'll have a sunset or a beach. It'll have the word integrity on it, but no one really notices it. It's fading into the background. The problem is if no one talks about it, if there's no conversation about it on any sort of a regular basis, it becomes forgotten. I was talking to Adam Silver, commissioner at the NBA, as part of doing the book. I have a lot of respect for the way that he leads. And he talked to me about the importance of communicating integrity on a regular basis. And he likened it to television advertising. And he said, Rob, you don't run one TV ad and call that a campaign. If you want to make an impression, you've actually got to repeat yourself a number of times. And you might actually have to use slightly different ways of communication in order to get your point across. But by repeating it and by talking about it in a number of different ways, you instill it into the culture and you really bring it to life. sticking a poster on the wall but never talking about it doesn't really do any good.
How do you see it manifested in the Airbnb culture now? Can you give us any short stories about that?
Sure. I'll give you an example. One thing that we do at Airbnb in order to keep it alive is we've created a program called Ethics Advisors. So the problem, if you want employees to come forward and discuss ethical dilemmas, raise questions, you have to make them comfortable to do it. And unfortunately, a lot of employees aren't comfortable going to the legal department, right? It's afraid, they have to go to that floor where all the lawyers are, or you've got to go to HR. And that's not a comfortable place for people. So what we decided to do was bring ethics to the employees. And we do it by this program where we have 30 ethics advisors, and they are spread out all over the company. And they're ordinary employees. They've got day jobs. There's a couple of engineers. There's a couple of people in customer support, a couple of folks in marketing. But they have a day job, and they volunteer their time to be ethics advisors on the side. So we bring all the ethics advisors in, we train them on the code of ethics, we have regular conversations with them about it, and then they become a resource in their group of employees for ethical questions. So you don't have to go to a scary place and talk to a strange lawyer. You can actually talk to somebody on your team that you know. And what we found is that people are far more likely to raise ethical questions to people that they know or to people that they trust on their team than they are if you just set up a hotline alone. And look, we've got a hotline. We've got different ways for people to do formal reports. But to give you an example, last quarter, we had over 100 inquiries to ethics advisors.
Wow.
Just with employees coming to them to ask a question. Like we had one employee come to us, a recruiter, and the recruiter went to her ethics advisor on the recruiting team and said, I just finished a recruitment of a senior candidate. Really excited, terrific candidate. He got an offer. I called him and congratulated him. And a week later, he sent me a wonderful card thanking me, and he enclosed an Amazon gift card for $200. Can I keep it? And that's the sort of thing that we had never really encountered before. It was a very nice gesture, but should an employee be able to keep a gift in a circumstance like that from a candidate? In I think a number of environments, a recruiter would have just pocketed the gift card, right? No one would have known. But at Airbnb, there's an environment where everybody's comfortable coming forward, having a conversation about something like this, and really wanting to do the right thing. And I think that's just one example of the sort of things that we talk about and we work with at Airbnb that I think creates the culture that, we're trying to do the right thing.
That's super. I noticed in your book, and I've been really interested in what's happening at the societal level and what's the role of companies in society and of their leaders in that. And I know you addressed that in your book. So there's the internal integrity within the company and with ongoing operations. What do you see as the role of integrity in Airbnb in society?
Yeah. I think traditionally the world has just looked at companies and seen their role as, to make money. And a CEO was evaluated on how successful they were in hitting a quarterly target or getting the stock price up. Recently, companies, there's this a sea change, really, and it's part of, I think, this integrity revolution. The Business Roundtable, which I think represents some of the most, many of the largest companies in the country, recently recognized that companies have more than just investors as stakeholders. Companies need to be thinking about the impact of how they act on employees, on customers, on communities where they operate. Look, we're not going to be able to solve big global problems like climate change if companies are just simply focused on making money. And I think there's an increased recognition, particularly in a world where politics is deadlocked and we've lost confidence in many ways in government. The world needs more from companies. We need companies to step up. Sure, they need to make money, of course, but we need them to also solve some of society's biggest problems and be thinking in a bigger way about what they can do to contribute. The recent, the coronavirus provides a number of examples of companies that are thinking in ways that are not just how can we make money, but how can we provide value? What can we do to make a difference? So take a company like Dyson vacuum cleaners. Dyson vacuum cleaners actually looked at the shortage of ventilators and recognized that their business and the way that they build vacuums had a number of similarities to ventilators. Their team actually designed a ventilator, and they are now working on producing those ventilators. And they believe that they can produce 1,500 ventilators faster than a number of the medical supply companies. Now, they may not make any money from this, but they are using their assets, their skills, and their tools to make a broader contribution to society simply because it's the right thing to do. And it may ultimately, I think, reflect well on their brand. The interesting thing we see, Kathryn, is that companies that are ethical, that are thinking about bigger picture ways to contribute, their stock in the long run actually outperforms companies that are seen as unethical. So the irony of all this is having values and doing things, operating in a way that has integrity doesn't slow your business up. It doesn't get in the way of making money. If you've got a long-term view, it'll actually help you.
You mentioned, thank you so much, by the way. What's exciting about this is that is the kind of thing that I know that in leadership courses and organizational courses, we have been teaching for years, but we've had to teach about the debate between those who think that it's only making money that is what they're there for, and the people who think like you. So it is just exciting to hear an executive speak as you are right now.
Well, our CEO founder, Brian, has had a lot of influence in this area. One thing that makes Airbnb, I think, a little different is, Brian never went to business school. Unlike a lot of CEOs, Brian design school. He graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design, where they actually talked quite a bit about this concept of ethical design. And Brian's parents are both social workers. So Brian's background, I think he looks at the world a little differently. And I think that has a lot of value and has had a big influence on the way that Airbnb operates, and it's influenced the way that I think.
That's fascinating. Anything else you want to share about the role of Airbnb or what's happening right now with this global crisis and the role of companies and specifically Airbnb?
Yeah, obviously, Airbnb has seen a significant drop off in short-term travel as a result of the virus. But Brian likes to say that never waste a good crisis, and in crisis there can be opportunities. So one of the things that Airbnb is doing is, there are a number of places that are empty because of the virus. That may present an opportunity to work with healthcare workers. Healthcare workers need a place to stay near hospitals where they don't have to necessarily go home to their family, but can stay close to the hospitals. And we are working with Airbnb, with a number of healthcare organizations now to explore ways where Airbnb hosts can provide a space for healthcare workers and therefore can make a contribution in their way to fighting the virus. So look, I think times like this, I gave you the example of Dyson vacuum cleaners. There's another company called Bloom Energy that recognized that they could actually restore ventilators because there were a lot of similarities between their fuel cells and ventilators. So they just volunteered to the state of California to refurbish 200 ventilators. If you think creatively as a business, you may find that you've got talent or you've got physical assets that may be able to contribute in a time of crisis. And I think that's the sort of thing that, recognizing that you've got other stakeholders besides your shareholders. You've got an obligation to help the community at large where you operate. And I think by doing so, it will, in the long run, reflect well on your brand. I think that's the way to operate and think in these times.
Thank you so much, Robert. Again, the name of Robert's book is, why don't you say it so we hear it in your voice?
The name of the book, wow, and it just so happens, I've got a copy right here. The name of the book is Intentional Integrity, How Smart Companies Can Lead an Ethical Revolution. And it covers, it's a very practical book. If you're looking for Socrates and Plato and ethical theory, you'll be disappointed. But it's a very practical book for if a company wants to drive integrity into its culture and make it a part of its business, and wants to understand why that's actually a good thing for its business and for the world, I think the book can really help them.
Thank you. And the way you describe it, of course, that means that leadership plays a key role there, because when you say drive it, I mean, who's driving? It's the leadership. But the leadership working, I think, from what you've described, with people across the whole company.
You have to have buy-in from the leader. I mean, if your CEO doesn't behave ethically and doesn't believe that it's important, there's nothing you can do. I mean, you may be a caring HR professional or a general counsel that wants to do it and wants to make an impact, and you can try, but everyone in a company takes their lead from the top of the company, and they notice, they watch, they understand how decisions are made, they know how people act. And I think if anything, you can end up looking pretty hypocritical if as an HR professional or a general counsel or the like, you talk about integrity, and then your leaders go the other way. So leadership buy-in is critical in this kind of situation.
And I think as people read your book, they'll see by the way you describe what happened at eBay as well as at Airbnb, the key roles that the top people played.
The world is expecting more and more leaders, right? It used to be kind of easy. You had to just drive a stock price up. Now you got to drive a stock price up, but you've also got to be a role model in the way that you behave in the office. And you've also got to be a creative thinker and someone that is working not just to help shareholders, but you've got to be a leader for your customers and for communities. Bad behavior is not going to be swept under the rug anymore. In the old days, you didn't have to worry. If you did something wrong, it was going to get handled quietly and swept under the rug. Today, I think companies are filled with potential whistleblowers, right? Everyone, the internet has changed everything, and it makes everyone a potential whistleblower. And so you've got to be thinking as a leader that, how you act every day, how you treat others, you ought to be proud of it. And you ought to assume that there's a camera sitting on your shoulder following you around all day. Because in reality, anything you do or anything you say, you have to assume it's going to end up somewhere online.
Thank you so much, Rob. This has been a great conversation, and I'm excited about the work that you're doing in the world.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.